as we were thinking about the topic for this keynote, one of the things that, about 3 weeks ago, so I had this email about 9. And we were watching together on the History Channel. There was a very nice series, 10-part series called It's America, History of Us. I didn't grow up here in this country, so I had little knowledge about the various battles that were fought. I came from graduate studies, didn't really have any liberal arts courses. But it was enlightening to learn where we have come from. And the reason I chose this topic is because it's equally enlightening, as we will talk about for the rest of the session, that a lot has changed in the last 20 years. At the same time, a lot remains the same. And that is the crux of the issue, because we have, as Parag laid out, the amount of traffic that has increased on the global internet, right? The amount of data that organizations deal with has grown, thousands-fold. Yet, some of the techniques we've been using to secure our systems are as antiquated as 25-year-old technologies. And that is what we need to challenge as an industry, as an academia. We need to do it. We need to challenge status quo. So before we jump in, let's start. Security is a pretty serious subject, so I thought I'd start with a sort of a lighter note, right? I don't know if you can see from the back, but before we jump as an industry, as an academia into the security topic, let's think about what security is viewed by the end users, right? My 70-year-old mom to my 80-year-old daughter, right? These are all users, and often security is viewed as an annoyance, right? Security is viewed as necessary evil that we need to have. That is true, and that's frankly what we need to learn from the past, right? So that as we move forward in the next 5 to 10 years, Parag talked about the mobility trends. What do we do differently so that in 10 years we don't have the same cartoon with a different detail here? And that's really the challenge for all of us. So what I thought we would do is, actually before I jump into the agenda, this is actually a little example. On the left side you see here a book called Hacking Exposed. This is the best-selling security book in the history of security industries, written by a gentleman named George Kurtz and Stuart McClure. And what you see is the inside cover from the first edition, around 98, 99 timeframe. They're on the 6th edition or so. And the reason I bring it up here is it essentially gives you a flowchart of an anatomy of an attack. And if you compare this with the more recent attacks, whether it be Night Dragon, whether it be Aurora, whether it be Stuxnet, you will find some very striking similarities. And that goes back to my point, is not a lot has changed. The human behavior is not going to change. So what we need to do is really learn from where we have come from so that we can better protect our futures and our children's futures. So what we'll talk about is, how do we get here, right? The good old days. Security was not as big a deal up until just decades ago, 13 years ago. Learn from that and really focus on what we have seen, and we are seeing a perfect storm. And frankly, what are we going to go from? And I hope this to be a dialogue, right? If time permits, we'll do a quick Q&A, otherwise during the break time. So be happy to engage in a dialogue. This is an issue. Cybersecurity is an issue. There is no one entity, no one company, no one organization, regardless of its size, or no one government for that matter, is going to be solved. So this is a collective social responsibility in addition to all the commercial activities. So let's do, just not too long ago, the fastest way to go to production, and I don't know, some of you, maybe I'm old enough here to remember some of this, but the security update or the antivirus update used to be monthly. Can you imagine getting a monthly update today? And the best way to get a protection is you dial in with your 80 commands and you get a 300 baud connection, and you have a couple of 100 kilobytes of the DAT files or the device definition files. Right? And the biggest issue we had was the floppy, the master boot record, MBR of the floppy. And as long as we didn't really do things, too widely, we were largely secure. This is laughable, right? This is child's, play today, right? Given the kind of effects we are seeing. Yet, a lot of the security technologies we are using are rooted back into 20 years ago, or 25 years ago, of what built this. And that's why we have seen a lot of the challenges we've seen. Think about, a lot of you have heard about the term consumerization of IP. These were the consumer devices not too long ago. You didn't have to worry about security. There was no connectivity, IP connectivity. Today, half of the people in this room have, some kind of an Apple device or some kind of an Android device, right? And those are, as I'll give you some examples, those are really, in one way, you can look at the future weapons that can bring down entire nations and organizations. Same thing on the network side, right? I talked about the devices and the kind of the security issues. Not too long ago, as the organizations embraced networking, internet connectivity, and as we all got sort of Ethernet jacks in our, on our offices, right? There was one connection, connect here and you get the wall. Pretty soon we all realized that, that's probably not as secure because you could have a contractor come in and get access to the same information. So we moved here, right? We had a trusted jack and untrusted jack. Guests plug in here, employees plug in there. The reality is that the nature of our networks and the kind of the information that is inside has changed so much that we really need to move to a whole new model where essentially, yes, you verify, but trust no one. So some of the fundamental premise that is built today's network need to fundamentally change again for us to have a security in the future. So that's, just looking back, right? Not too long ago. What are we seeing today? Literally today and over the last couple of years, right? We're seeing a perfect storm. And the perfect storm because of the four key drivers. We have explosion of IP-connected devices. I'll share some numbers. The threats we are seeing, right? The motivation of the threats and the kind of the threats. A lot of us may not realize that threats have moved from the virtual world to the physical world. It's one thing to have your web page sort of defaced or maybe your money stolen from your credit card that you will come back and say, look, I'll just call my credit card company, I don't have to pay anything, right? It is annoyance, but it's okay. What is not okay is when you're taking the NJ transit train and the train tracks that are supposed to work don't work as expected, and there is a train collision. And a lot of these are proof of concepts that have already been demonstrated. It's not rocket science. It's not science fiction. And really, the biggest thing is again, we're all realizing slowly is this whole new privacy model, or lack thereof, I should say. Once you're online, you're online. I mean, and I'll give you a couple of, I don't have time for demos, I have a couple of screenshots of the demo that we did at RSA about, how lack of privacy could be a serious threat to us as individuals, as organizations, as society. So let's talk a little bit about it. If you look at the number of connected IP devices, you're going from 1 billion devices, a couple of billion now, to about 50 billion devices. And I use 50 billion as a conservative number. Cisco has a report that pegs the number as about 1 trillion devices, and a couple of other numbers at a few hundred billion devices. So let's look at conservative estimate, right? And we all can relate to it, right? It's not just the IP connected devices we came to know from the PC servers, right? And we know that's pretty common. But if you take a closer look at this, there are a whole range of our entire life is surrounded by IP devices. And I know this is more in the developed world than the developing, but pretty soon, I mean, China buys 1 in 4 processors built today. And in a couple of years, they will have far more devices. Same thing with India and Brazil, right? They'll have far more devices. If you look at this, 95% of these devices, if you exclude your PC servers, have no security whatsoever. Your average car has about 37 million lines of code and half a dozen networks. And there have already been demonstrated some attacks where with just simple apps you can disable brakes. You can essentially connect those networks within the canvas, as it's called, within the automobile, and really have some very scary situations. So again, the idea is not to scare, But the idea is to recognize that this is what's controlling our lives, not just the digital, but the physical lives as well, right? Electric, your water supplies, right? What is controlled? It's controlled by computers, right? The amount of chlorine, the amount of chemicals that go in, right? Your automobiles, power grid. So unless we as a society take a closer look at the challenges ahead of us, we're going to have some really difficult times ahead. And just to put some perspective, again, proud share network traffic numbers, but in the next 5 to 7 years, when you have 3 to 4 billion connected devices, 50 billion devices in about 5 to 10 years, 4 billion connected people, lots and lots of data. And the piece that's very interesting, and I think you all can relate, and I'll give you an example, is the applications or the apps, right? There are probably, a few hundred thousand apps today. And Google, I think, you talked about Google's model, right? Google has zero security model. You could put a $25, developer fee, and you can put anything, and I mean literally anything on their app store, and it will go through because there are no checks and balances. On the other side, Apple, with the iOS devices, is a fairly interesting and fairly well-defined model. But what I'll show you later is even those checks and balances are virtually useless. So if you look at the number of malware we saw, this whole tsunami of malware we saw in 2007, right? I mean, as you can see, in 2007 we said more malware than past 20 years combined, 10 years combined. You fast forward, and by 2010 the situation was even worse. And this is just about a billion connected devices and probably a billion connected people. When you add up all of those device numbers that I talked about, what will we see with 50 billion devices? Also, there comes an architectural challenge where for security companies, a lot of they work on what's called a blacklisting model, right? So I know this protocol or this application or this file is bad, so I'll put it in my update file, and that's a bad file. The rate at which this is going, you're not going to be able to keep up. In fact, by the time I finish this discussion, we would have seen 5,000 brand new threats, right? So this whole notion of blacklisting, where I know something is bad, so I'm going to block it, is fundamentally flawed given the explosion of the numbers we see. And if you look at, and this is actually a picture that I drew after I was talking to the CIO of ICICI Bank, who happens to be an ex-Navy officer in India, right? He best described this. Again, we talked about all kinds of threats, but he best described it saying that the kind of the threats that he's seeing are like submarine, right? In addition to large numbers of threats, there are very sophisticated threats which are essentially diving deep and hiding and creating surprise attacks. That's the new normal. I'll give you a couple of examples. So if you look at an average device, whether it be a PC or your embedded device or your mobile device, right? This is a typical stack. Your application, your operating system, you have some kind of a BIOS or some kind of a boot record, and then plus. Some of the examples, and I was talking to the colonel here, some of the examples we've seen in the DoD space, especially and around the NATO countries, is when threats are moving down the stack. I'll give you a real example. When you go to China, right? You bring your laptop, you go in your hotel, you're going out for a conference or a meeting, and you come back. Your laptop is where it was, closed, powered off, right? What's the guarantee that you leave the data on the laptop or the laptop itself is secure? Well, a typical example we have seen is it is not too difficult, even though your laptop may be fully encrypted, which is what a lot of us do, right? It is not too difficult to change reflash the BIOS. It's a user level update. And have an advanced persistent threat, which is essentially a kind of an attack that hides and that does not go away, because your security is operating up at the top layer, the applications and the operating system. It's not looking down at the BIOS or the processor. So you could easily have an attack or a threat that's deep down hidden, and you want to know about it. In fact, kinds of threats like this is what really led Intel to pay $8 million for backup, right? So So again, this is not, I'm not talking about academics, I'm not talking about hypothetical. This is happening, this is here and now. This is what we as an industry need to address. And part of this is also because the supply chain, the number of components that go into our devices and the far-flung locations where these devices are made, it is virtually impossible for you to make sure that the device you're shipping or the product you're making is secure. So that's kind of the threats, right? The type of the threats, the numbers, the types, etc. But one other thing that has fundamentally changed over the last several years is also the motivation, right? Why do these threats happen? If you go from left to right on the slide, it used to be, hacking for fun, 17-year-old kid who can't get a date, in the basement, floating around, right? That was kind of the typical that you had in mind. Things move, organized crime. Today, if you can hack into someone's bank account, right, and move money over to, wherever you need to, or have man-in-the-middle attack, the likelihood of you getting caught, and even if you were caught, the likelihood of you getting punished is far lower than you go to 7-Eleven and run with a bottle of soda. That's how safe cybercrime is, right? That's why you saw a lot of sort of likes of ZS. They essentially have a documented $70 million siphoning off of money from people's bank accounts and credit cards. ZS can. What changed in the last 2 years really is the right to example, where now it wasn't really driven by finance, the financial gains, but when the nation states got involved, China got involved, Israel got involved, Iran got involved. Now it's a whole new game. So Aurora is thought to be a laser-sharp pinpoint attack from Google, from China, originating from China, going at about 28 to 30 companies in U.S. who heavily rely on the intellectual property, like Google, Symantec, Juniper. These are all the targets that we saw. And more disturbing attack was Stuxnet last year, right? Where I'll let you talk about that in a second. So what has really changed is the motivations have changed. It's no longer about individuals or organized crimes. Now nation states are behind a lot of these attacks. And the stakes have changed in the sense that, it's one thing to deface a website or get some money out of a credit card account. It's an entirely separate thing to have your nuclear power control for the nuclear power plant be compromised and potentially your physical lives be lost. So let's talk about Stuxnet. I know you probably all know about it, so I won't go into the details, but probably the best way to describe this, it is a new weapon that is entirely made out of code. When you think about weapons, think about ships and aircrafts and guns, etc. Right? Those are all true. But this is a whole new weapon. And the quick history here is, this is a worm that actually disrupted Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities. It is thought to be, there are no verifications, of course, it's thought that Israel, with help of the United States, was behind this. Essentially, this impacted a very specific device manufactured by Siemens. And it was not looking for any, to disrupt the entire thing. It was looking to hide. This attack essentially was hidden for almost 18 months. All it did was when it found the right system, it essentially changed the speed of the centrifuges, the speed at which so the motors were made. And that impacted. So the precision with which this attack took place, it had almost 20 zero-day vulnerabilities. And an average black market value of a zero-day vulnerability is about $1 million. It worked flawlessly in a lot of Windows operating systems. And coming from a software vendor, I know how difficult it is to run your software in one version, let alone not worry about all the patches that you do, right? So again, Stuxnet changed the game. And unfortunately, I have to say that we ain't seen anything yet. This is a proof of concept. This was, hopefully you put to sort of better use, right, by slowing down Iran's nuclear missions. But this gives you an example. I was on a keynote about 6 months ago, along with the product manager from Siemens, whose systems are impacted, right? Imagine the amount of the pressure and the investment they're going through. But they're very big, open and forthright. They're basically saying that the level of sophistication that went into this attack, no one vendor could have actually predicted. That's where we as an industry come. Again, I think the biggest question that we need to ask is, I'll give you sort of an example. There were, up until not too long ago, there were sort of two scenarios when it comes to your organization security. You're either infected, you have some security problems, and you know about it. And the second scenario was you have some security issues in your organization, data is leaking, etc., and you don't know about it. One of the binary decisions. What really changed with this advanced persistent threats, which are the hidden threats in your organization, is you have security issues, you don't know about it, but someone else does. So the question to ask yourself is, if you have, and that's a question of, I'll come back to this in a second. If you have a compromised system that is leaking data, information, whatever is valuable in the organization, how would you know? And this is not just a rhetorical question, this is not a hypothetical question. I can guarantee you that probably 1 in 5 organizations sitting in this room is a victim of this, and you may not know about it. So again, this is what has really changed. It used to be the case that the threats were where you have a massive DOS attack, or you have a website down, or you have a massive network traffic. Those days are gone. The threats are like wine. The older they get, the longer they stay undetected, the more valuable they get. So let's talk about, Parag talked about mobility and sort of the new paradigm shift in the world of computing. Right? So I'll talk about how many of you are aware of or have seen a little app called Flashlight? Anybody? Good. So this is one of the most popular apps in both Google as well as Apple App Store. All it does is, as we all get older, in the middle of the night, you want to kind of see a little bit of light, your iPhone essentially turns, or your Android device, the screen is bright so you can see things. Our researchers at McAfee essentially built a prototype using Flashlight. So a lot of you may know about this, but the reason Flashlight got to #1 in Apple's App Store last year was because it actually allowed tethering off of iPhone's internet connection before Apple and AT&T announced tethering. So it was a free app. I think it was a 99-cent app. But what it shows is Apple, who has tight control over application, it was easy to sneak in this change. So we want to do something a little more interesting. So we actually, by the way, we did not upload this in the App Store and put people's devices at risk, but the researchers were fairly confident this would have gone through. So we built a little app, Flashlight-like app, and it did the following. Once you load the app and you launch the app, right, it would essentially go out and reach out to Twitter. Right, something that's Apple allows, fairly innocent. And upon a trigger, essentially applicant will register, and it would look for a specific hashtag on Twitter, which is something very easy to do. And that hashtag, hacker would have put in, or we put in, right, would actually have a link to a command and control server. Command and control server is kind of this mastermind of a botnet. And it would download a piece of code back into the application. Now, this is the interesting part. While Apple has tight controls today about what application they would allow, this application is fairly innocent. It would have easily gone through, and the real interesting piece would have arrived when we downloaded the code after the app was on the App Store. Right? This just shows, and this is just an academic exercise, right? This just shows how easy it is to take the mobile devices, and most of these mobile devices don't have any security, as talked about it. and really turn them into massive botnets or weapons of whatever you want to do. And what it did was, again, this particular app essentially revealed your location. That's the phone number. This is a real. I didn't have time to run a real demo, but that's a real phone number. It basically showed you the location. And the demo we have also actually did a little, something more interesting. It actually donated $10 to Red Cross. Because you now have control over the phone. Not only that, a lot of the time, and I've done this, around in Japan tsunami, right? We did a couple of these things, and you get a little pop-up to say, thanks for your donation to Red Cross. The app was sophisticated where it would actually accepted that pop-up without you knowing about it. Right? So again, this is a little demo about where the future of malware is going. And again, I think when your PC was broken into, great. There's of course sensitive data, etc. And you don't want to lose that. But when your mobile device is broken, it's far more personal. It knows where you are.
My son doing all those plus on that.
The question I often get is, we have one of the highest R&D budgets in the industry. The question I get is, what do you guys actually do with all that money? But no, I think this is, so again, as I said, it may sound like academic, but there are far more disturbing things that are already going on. So anyway, talked about, what's happening, and again, both the sophistication, the motivation, type of the malware, the new devices. The question now, real question for all of us, is what do we do about it, right? So there's a few things. I think we need to really expand our horizon. When we think about security, right? When we think about type of the devices, we think about the type of the information, we need to fundamentally rethink and challenge the status quo. I'll give you a couple of examples. And then I think, as you talk, one of the speakers in the afternoon have this topic, and this is something very important. We also need to forward some very important public-private, government-private, academic-private partnership. Because some of the challenges we are seeing are too big for any one entity to solve. So let's talk a little bit about this, right? So this is a chart that basically shows the history of computing in the past 50 years. As you go from the mainframe to mini computer to PC to connected PC, right? You saw some massive application changes. You saw a whole different way of doing things. In fact, I distinctly remember the mini computer era, maybe getting into it. Ashutosh, who's here, right? With NIKSUN, happens to be my very first boss. And his first project he gave me when I was at Columbia was to roll out a 300 megabyte hard drive that was about this big, about this wide, right? So things have changed. But the most important thing we saw as we went through this computing evolution was the device multiplier. As you go from one phase to the other, you saw 10 to 100-fold increase in the number of devices. And as we talked about this, right, as we look at these devices, we need to think about pervasive security. Of course, we need to protect our PCs and servers and all the things that are familiar to us. But let's make sure that we look at the power grids, we look at the vehicles, we look at the financial systems, right? We look at our healthcare system, right? These are all well connected. Kaiser, one of the large HMOs, based in California, right? Class A network internally, 120,000 devices, completely flat network, no hierarchy. 1/3 of the doctors bring their own devices. Kaiser's IT system, their security organization, has the accountability, yet have no control over 1/3 of the devices. Right? These issues are here and now. Right? So we as an industry need to think over horizon and think about both on the endpoint side and the cloud as well as the network level, right? Expand the security horizon. Here's a real example of a bank, right? Here on the East Coast. In literally a matter of 2.5 years, they actually tripled the number of IP connected devices. I show some charts, but these are some real data, right? And God only knows, how much it will go over the next 3 years. And really, for them, the biggest piece before even they deliver security is to know what exists on the network. They had no idea I'll give you another example here. A lot of the organizations have a fairly tight, fairly rigid security, saying, right, you can't get a VPN, you need to be coming from a trusted network, you have two-factor authentication, all of that. Guess what's some of the easiest way to steal data, right? Go give $100 to a janitor who's cleaning the office, right? Who can swap a hard drive out of a computer. And right there, you have unencrypted documents that you ever printed in the last 6 months, all the faxes you received, all the printouts you have, right? So the idea is the nature of the threats have changed, especially as the plethora of the devices increase, right? So we need to have this, broader perspective. Also, the security model that we have, a lot of the organization use is broken. What is that security model? It's fairly simple. It's a flock of sheep. As long as you're at the center of the flock, right, you're fairly secure. You're not, if you, it's probably the sheeps, who are at the outer edges, they'll get, hit first. So I'm fairly secure. And, it's laughable, but unfortunately, this is the model that a lot of the organizations face. Small businesses, right? They basically say, no one's going to come after me, right? Yet they have some of the most lax systems when it comes to, customer information, right? Credit cards, whatever the information, doctor's office, little security thing. We need to do. I'll give you a couple of examples, right? We need to devise solutions that what I like to call taking oxygen out of the room. And here's the example I use. So we all know that when you add oxygen to the fire, you get explosion, right? For my 9-year-old, right, this is the way I tell her security, right? So what it means is when you have a piece of malware, and you let malware execute or infiltrate your network, you're infection. We need to take the oxygen out. What does it mean? When you get the malware, either you need to stop the execution of the malware, or if you're sitting on the network, you need to make sure that malware never makes it to the enemy system, even though it enters the network. That's the kind of the future approach we need. And again, this is no one technology. This is a fundamental approach where, as I talked about, I'll talk about the known good versus non-bad in a second. But imagine, 75% of the malware on the system, right, propagates through modification of registry or system files on a Windows environment, right? What if there was a way where only the authorized applications or system can update those system files, right? That technology exists. You would essentially kill 3/4 of the malware. So that's the kind of the approach we need. Second one, and I think this is true for a lot of the government systems, right? No matter how hard you try, you have to assume that you are penetrated, right? How do you operate from a system in a reliable fashion, even though when you know that it's better? We also need to build what we call resilient system, and I use a sort of a tanker example, right? The reason NIKSUN and the reason a lot of these large tankers, even when they're on ground, they don't have an issue because they actually they containerize a lot of their sort of, pockets, right? So if your, portion of the ship breaks into, well, you have a little container, it's isolated, and the rest of the ship is okay. So we got to think about our networks, our endpoints the same way. Right? Let a piece of the network be compromised because you know that sooner or later, no matter how hard that, you will get infected. The question is, how do you operate in a trusted manner even when you are infected? The other piece, and again, this is where, as I gave an example earlier, right? This is the OSI layer, right? We think about security generally at a fairly upper levels, right? No longer adequate. This is sort of the mnemonic that I actually stole the slide from one of my colleagues, but I love this sort of graphic here, just to remember this, right? Basically put this up and say, this is how you remember 7 layers of OSI, right? We need to have security drive down the stack. Now, the question that often comes up is, if you have security at every layer, doesn't it create a level of overhead? The answer is yes, it does create. However, the advances in the processor technology, memory technology, network connectivity, right, are sufficient enough that we can afford to have a level of security at every layer. The question you need to ask is, if your security only operated at the upper layer and you know that the threats are moving down, would you sleep better at night knowing that you're not protecting what you ought to protect? The other thing that fundamentally needs to change is this whole notion of blacklisting, right? As I mentioned earlier, most of the security technologies operate on a known bad model, where I've seen something, so I'm going to block it, whether it be an antivirus file, whether it be the protocol, whether it be the destination, etc. Right? The problem is that there are so many of these bad things that we need to change the model on its head and really work on the known good model. Say, I know these 5 applications and these 50 IP addresses that my server needs to interact with. They're good. Everything else is bad. The way you basically, bring it to life is, typically your PCs, your Macs, etc., work on the known blacklist. But a lot of these devices that I talked about are going to be fixed function devices, right? Your railroad, track controller, your medical device, your smart meter. While they may be types of Windows device, there is no reason for them to run any application other than what they're intended for. So whether you do it on the network or on the endpoint, right? Only allow known good application, everything else is bad. That's where we need to sort of look. And there is something in the middle about the reputation-based service, which is, is occasionally need to access a broader range. We talked about the mobile applications, right? One of the #1 issue that we are seeing organizationally, right? Apple said in the earnings call last week, 86% of the Fortune 500 organizations have already deployed iPad. 91% have deployed iPhone. Right? So this is here and now. The #1 issue we see here is no employee wants to carry multiple devices, one for home, one for work. Right? So what's the requirement? That you have your home applications, right? And your requirements may be, hey, I ought to be able to locate if my iPhone gets lost, right? I ought to be able to communicate. I ought to be able to back it up. At the same time, when the device is used for corporate application, the needs are different, right? The CIO wants to make sure that there's a little container he can remotely kill. If you are let go from a company or if a device gets lost, he can essentially wipe the data. That he can attest that there is a level of policy and security that needs to go in. So I think as we think about mobile security or the next mobility and mobile security the next couple of days, let's think about how do we have examples like this. In fact, I'll give you a real example. Jabil Circuit, 100,000 plus employees, one of the largest contract manufacturers, was with their CIO recently. And that CIO has essentially stopped buying PCs and mobile phones for their employees. He's essentially giving $2,100 per employee. You go buy whatever you need. All he's going to do is a little container in his PC that he controls. Everything else is fair game. There's a Chinese wall, so to speak, between the corporate sort of container and the rest of it. Now, it's not as easy. That technology is still evolving. It's not mature, but that's where the world is.